On the 27th of August 1830, Sophie Dawes' longtime lover was found dead under mysterious circumstances. She was the daughter of a poor alcoholic fisherman, and he a French prince. At first glance, the match seems impossible, so how did their relationship come to be? And was it simply a coincidence that the elderly prince died right before he cut Sophie out of his will? Join me as we explore her untold rags to riches tale. Sophie Dawes was born on the 29th of September 1790 in St. Helens, on the Isle of Wight, off the southern coast of England. She came from troubled circumstances. Her father was Richard Dawes, an alcoholic fisherman who dabbled in illegal smuggling in the English Channel. Her mother was Jane Calloway, but it seems that her parents were not married, as her mother was recorded on her death certificate as being a spinster, indicating she was never legally married. It was a deprived youth, as Sophie, or Sophia as she more often went by, was just one of 10 children. As her family was so impoverished, Sophie would collect winkles from the beaches of the Isle of Wight to help feed the household. More shockingly, she and her siblings spent time in a workhouse in the town of Newport on the island. These workhouses, or houses of industry as they were officially known, provided a very modest bed and board to the poor in return for a very heavy workload during the day. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the deprivation of the family and the general prevalence of infant and child mortality in the late 18th century, 6 of Sophie's siblings did not survive into adulthood. By the time she was a teenager, Sophie was working as a servant to a farmer on the Isle of Wight, and before long, she was sent to the mainland where she was employed as a chambermaid at the George Hotel in Portsmouth. Situations like these, where children worked long hours much like adults, were an all too common feature in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, and it would be another 70 years before the government regulated such activity. Like so many other English people during the 19th century, Sophie was drawn to one of the major cities which were expanding exponentially. In her case, being from the south of England, she headed to London. Here she became a milliner's assistant, making and selling hats, but she lost this job after she entered a seemingly illicit relationship with a married water carrier. Following this, she spent some time selling oranges. What is striking about all of this is that Sophie Dawes had developed an instinct for survival, even when circumstances constantly turned against her. As we will see, she used this instinct and her looks to make a name for herself, and if you want to look your best, then you need to be using the UFO 3 by today's sponsor Ferreo. As you might know, I was lucky to get my UFO 3 deep facial hydration device a while back, and I've been using it all the time to make my skin cleaner and more hydrated. The UFO 3 hydrates your skin and increases skin moisture by 126% in just 2 minutes. It also reduces the appearance of wrinkles in just 1 week, and it's more effective than a sheet mask alone in just 2 minutes. Using it is really easy. Make sure your skin is dry and clean. Remove the attachment ring from the UFO 3 and place the mask onto the device and secure it. Turn the UFO 3 on by pressing this button and press it again to select a preset treatment. You can also select a specialized treatment from the app, and it even has an offline mode. Here I'm selecting the warming thermotherapy that has given me great results and hydration for my skin. Now for the best part, use the UFO 3 and massage your face in circular motions until the treatment ends. The UFO 3 is really on discount, so make sure to make the most of the 30% discount you get by using the link in the description, plus an additional 10% for the first 50 that use my coupon code 10forgotten. Now back to the video. In the course of the late 1800s, her life entered into the direction which would lead to her rise to prominence, and then a great scandal and fall. Much of this was entwined with the international context of the early 19th century. Following the French Revolution of 1789, Europe's great powers had gone to war with France after the revolutionary government had killed King Louis XVI and declared the country to be a republic. Yet the French revolutionary armies stood up to the onslaught by Britain, Austria and others. Moreover, led by generals like Napoleon Bonaparte, they had succeeded in not just defending France, but conquering much of Western and Central Europe. The wars waged onward between France and Britain throughout these years, and as a result London was constantly teeming with soldiers and also former members of the French nobility who had sought refuge in England. It was with one of these soldiers, in fact an army officer, which Sophie entered into a relationship with at some stage in the late 1800s, when she was around 18. She became his mistress and moved into his house at Turnham Green in the city. When the affair ended, he paid her off with an income of £50 per year to stay quiet, money which she used to gain an education at a school in Chelsea. By 1810 the annuity she'd been granted came to an end, and she once again found herself in difficult circumstances. It was at this stage that Sophie took up a position working in a high-class brothel in Piccadilly, near the centre of London, and it was here that she first met Louis Henri, Duke of Bourbon, and the future Prince of Condé. Louis Henri was a Prince du Sang of the French royal house of Bourbon. This meant he was a member of an ancillary branch of the family, and though he was well down the order of succession, he was still one of the richest men in Europe, and had various titles. Early on in the Revolution, following the execution of his cousin, King Louis XVI, he had led an army within France in opposition of the revolutionary government, but eventually, as the revolutionary government tightened its control over France, he left for England and took up residence in London. While in the English capital, he had begun to frequent the very brothel in Piccadilly where Sophie had made her residence, and one evening a servant of the Duke's pointed out the girl from the Isle of Wight to him. Others had taken an interest in her too, and Louis Henri had to engage in a bizarre card game with two English aristocrats to decide who would take her as his mistress. The Duke won. This all happened in 1810. By 1811 she was residing in a house which Louis Henri had rented for her and her mother on Gloucester Street at Queen Square in London. The Duke had been previously married, but had divorced in 1780 and would never remarry. As such, their liaison was not strictly an affair, but was kept secret owing to the fact that she was a commoner and he of French royal blood, while he was also 34 years her senior. While living on Gloucester Street, she began studying classical and modern languages, philosophy, and how to fit into court society, having been appointed a tutor, the Abbé Briand. However, despite providing her with a lavish income of £8,000 a year, the Duke eventually began to grow tired of her, and then he headed to Spain where he engaged in a further relationship with a Miss Harris. In 1814 the Napoleonic Wars largely came to an end after Napoleon's drastically poor decision to invade Russia in 1812 backfired and all of his conquests across Europe were taken from him. After surrendering, he was briefly imprisoned in 1814, and even an effort to break free and reimpose himself as ruler of France ended in failure in 1815. As a result, from 1814 onwards, the French nobles and royalists who had established themselves in cities such as London and Vienna since the 1790s began to make their way back to Paris. Here the executed Louis XVI's brother had been restored to the throne as King Louis XVIII. Sophie now made her way there and managed to find her way back into Louis Henri's good graces. To prevent any scandal, and in order to make her appearance at court seem legitimate, the Duke organised a marriage between Sophie and an officer of the French Royal Guard, Adrien Victor de Fouché, which took place in London on the 6th of August 1818. Louis Henri, who was now the Prince of Condé, even made him a baron and she a baroness, as part of the arrangement. The new baron was seemingly completely unaware of the circumstances of Sophie and the prince's relationship, and was led to believe that she was his natural daughter and the widow of a Richard Clark. This done, the prince made her husband an aide de camp and bestowed a dowry of some 200,000 francs on her. Sophie now entered French society and became a noted Parisian socialite, even being well received at court, but this would soon all come crashing down. All went relatively well for some time, and few were aware of the true state of affairs. But by 1822, Sophie's husband had learned of the actual nature of his wife's and the prince's relationship. At this stage he split from her, returning the very substantial dowry the prince had bestowed and petitioning the courts for a judicial separation. This took 5 years to obtain, but was eventually granted in 1827. More substantially, the French court learned of the duplicity that had been engaged in, and when word reached King Louis XVIII, he decided to act on the scandal. He banned the Baroness from the French court, calling her naught more than a commoner street wench, yet tragically bereft of any skills of the trade. The king hoped this would bring an end to the affair and limit the scandal. As you might have expected, it didn't, and Sophie and Prince Louis Henri continued their relationship for years to come, driven in large part by her determination to maintain it. Also, as time went by, the scandal got worse. Sophie was rumoured to have several other lovers from common backgrounds, a situation which inflamed opinion at the French court, while she had also begun to make efforts to ingratiate herself with some of the king's wider family in order to gain rehabilitation at the court. These included the king's nephew and his cousin, Louis-Philippe, Duke of Orléans. Although these interventions failed to gain her restoration at the court, she did now strike up an acquaintance with the Duke of Orléans' young son, Henri Eugène, Duke of Aumale, and she soon began to scheme her next move. By now Prince Louis Henri was nearing the end of his life, being in his early 70s, and had no legitimate heir, as his only son had been executed in 1804. Thus, Sophie began to coerce him into bestowing a great proportion of his estate on the Duke of Aumale, Sophie clearly having come to an arrangement with his father. The old prince initially proved reluctant, but eventually she pressured him into signing a will in August 1829, which left 2 million francs and several properties to her, and a large proportion of the remainder of the estate to the Duke of Aumale. A further upswing in her fortunes occurred in the spring of 1830, when the Duke of Orléans, Aumale's father, was proclaimed King of the French in 1830, after his cousin Charles X was forced to abdicate during the July Revolution. Louis-Philippe I, also called the Citizen King, agreed to allow Sophie to return to court. She now became a more acceptable figure, as her position as the prince's mistress of nearly 20 years was unofficially recognised. During this time, Sophie lived in the Château de Chantilly and brought over many family members to become staff, even securing marriages for some of them to the relatives of powerful French figures. She also briefly became a popular hostess, known as the Queen of Chantilly. Things took a strange turn, however, that summer. The prince, who was unhappy with Louis-Philippe I's succession, seems to have decided to leave France and head to Switzerland, and was tinkering with the idea of changing the will which he had signed the previous August. It was then exceedingly suspicious when the 74-year-old prince was found dead in his quarters at his house at Saint-Lô on the morning of the 27th of August 1830. He had apparently hung himself using some handkerchiefs from the handle of a window, but observers were quick to note that he had become so feeble of late that he could barely tie his own shoelaces, let alone hang himself. The rumour mill went into overdrive in the aftermath of his death. Many, quite plausibly, suggested that Sophie had killed the prince, and that this had most likely been done with the complicity of the king himself, whose son was in line to inherit much of Louis Henri's estate, provided he did not change his will as he was proposing to do. Gossip that Sophie and the king had orchestrated the murder intensified when the case was dismissed without any real inquiry of what had happened. Due to the lack of investigation, we will never know if the prince really did take his life, and the authorities ruled it suicide. His will was contested by several collateral heirs of his family, but these petitions failed, and Sophie and the Duke of Aumale were the primary beneficiaries. Sophie moved back to England shortly afterwards, primarily to avoid the scandal which was still simmering in France. She gradually began selling her French estates and replaced them with a manor in Hampshire and a house at Hyde Park Square in London. With her wealth, Sophie helped to provide for her impoverished family and placed her elderly mother in a convent to live out her final years. Sophie developed dropsy in the years that followed and eventually died from the illness in London on the 15th of December 1840. At the time of her death, she had an estate worth £500,000, which would equate to tens of millions of pounds today. Her will was contested, with several family members gaining large portions. Her story of rags to riches and the scandals she was involved in at the French court continued to be a subject of interest in France for decades to come. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Sophie Dawes. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also be sure to leave them down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.